one of the bosses says that I want those logs, and these logs have all these codes, and these objects are supposed to be squawking. Squawking is like, I think it's like when aircraft like sends out their information of who they are and what their situation is or something like that. Maybe some pilots and stuff can chime in on that stuff. And all these maneuvers of these objects going at Mach speeds and stopping on a dime, because all these things have been happening all the time. These logs were taken because I assume they didn't want people to know that what these things were doing. But these things weren't here to harm us. And I could see these creatures in my mind, definitely more than one, probably 4 or 5. Do I think this thing was alive, that ship? Yeah. I think they control the craft with their mind, and there's no controls or buttons that they push. And I think they were doing way more than at that installation than tracking drug aircraft, because they had laser range finders that were huge and all kinds of tech. We had live fire there in the jungle. The Green Berets were there. The murderers from Waco were there. Why were all these guys there? Why would the Chinese military be concerned with some drugs moving in Peru? I know for a fact that our American government is running these drugs. And I saw all these other guys with biological suits, but their suits were more high-tech with breathing apparatuses, and there were 30 of them, and they marched right by me when I was taken away. This was routine for them. These guys have done this before. It was like a cold, calculated mission, like we were here to do a job and get the F out of our way. I think they went over there and picked up all this stuff in the ship, and they took it back to the U.S. More like I was sitting there watching a film, like I was with these aliens and these creatures, and they were touching me, not like sexually or with instruments or anything like that, just like holding my hands. And they had their hands on me, and they had 4 fingers, by the way. And then the interviewer asked, what kind of feeling did you get? Like a warm, loving feeling, like you'd have with a family. And the closest thing I could say would be almost like angels. And if I had to go with them, I would go right now. And I had this obsession with that because I guess with the pain of the experience in the Marine Corps, I just wanted to escape. I was thinking about being with these creatures a lot and wanting to go with them. So these agencies are on their own and they don't obey the law. They're just rogue and they go off on their own. Do I think it's a project by the government and everyone has a piece of it? No. I think these guys are just off on their own. No one knows what they do. No oversight, and they just do what they want to do. And they're evil. These guys are evil. Do I think it goes all the way up to Bill Clinton and Congress? Keep in mind this was like 1990 something. I think there might be guys that know about it, but they aren't going to say anything because they'll kill them. I heard Marine snipers and other guys talk about that I've heard that these guys stalk people on the streets and they'll kill them. I know that Army airborne snipers do the same thing. I heard that these guys use Delta Force to silence people by killing them, and that this goes on. And where do they get this money to finance? Very simply, this money isn't coming from government coffers. It comes from selling arms or selling drugs. And a lot of these businesses, like these spec ops, having unlimited money, it's not coming from government money. It's coming from selling arms or selling drugs. So this video can be found. The title is UFO Crash in Peru, and that is Lance Corporal Jonathan Wygant. So this story is about the janitor that kept a UFO in the school janitor's office. So this is 2nd grade in 1967, and the person writing this was a child. Quote, "A classmate of me walked to the side of the building at recess, away from all the other kids. Mr. Swan, the school janitor, stood by the entranceway of his janitor office. Mr. Swan waved us over in a way to have us check out what he had in the furnace room. Of course, it seemed creepy at first, but nothing inappropriate happened, and he really did have something amazing inside there. As we walked in, we saw a small disc. It was about the size of a Volkswagen, silver gray metallic, very smooth. It seemed like the roof was clear or missing entirely. A panel of controls and a blue vinyl seat were inside. My friend yelled out, 'Mr. Swan caught the disc from the baseball diamond.' The friend instantly slid against the wall and fell asleep. Immediately, a little gray man walks out. Amazed to see him, but I wasn't afraid at all. We talked through feelings and thought. This little gray man communicates by mind. His skin was ash color. Large black eyes, but they were kind and sincere. No nose, just small holes. Mouth was a small line. 4 fingers. Kind of like what the other guy said, that these things had 4 fingers. Feet were different somehow. Body was childlike. And it spoke to this person. It said, 'We are here to remind you who you are. Somehow I was able to know how the saucer flew. It pushed something out of the bottom while at the same time as get energy as something goes inside at the same time. And it seemed that was the part of the aircraft, or whatever you would call this thing, that was broken. The janitor brought it inside, and the other gray man was hurt, but he never came out. But somehow this witness knew that there was another one there. At home, I told my mom, and at first the mom was concerned that the janitor did that. But after asking a bunch of questions about the janitor and about what happened, my mom understood that nothing inappropriate happened. Actually, the witness never mentioned the alien and actually didn't remember it until years later. And the friend, asking years later, only remembers the craft and remembers that there were no bolts or rivets on the whole thing. I guess one of them, if I remember right, one of them was kind of familiar how shop things were put together. I think one of their dads or something was into that, and that was what they thought. Everybody that ends up seeing these things or getting up close to them have a feeling that they're never put together by any kind of like bolts or rivets or anything. It seems weird. Sometimes the words that we hear are like, it just seems like kind of molded out of one big piece or something like that. Or some people actually think that the entire craft is alive. Like it's all organic and it communicates by mind, like almost like some kind of a mix between inanimate I don't know, would you call that an inanimate object? Like some kind of mix between a living thing and a transportation vehicle. It's just, I don't even know what to think of these things. They just seem totally next level. Like, anyway, so I first heard that story on the Strange But True, I think it's called Strange But True Stories YouTube channel. And then the other one with the Lance Corporal about the UFO crash in Peru was Dr. Stephen Greer's channel. He interviewed him. And that channel used to be called Serious Disclosure, but I believe in the past, like somewhere between 2020, 2022 or something, he changed it to just his name, Dr. Stephen Greer. So this can be found on the Beyond Creepy channel. This last story is somebody that actually went inside a UFO, which I looked for more of these types of incidents that are not from Rob Lazar. So to look for stories that aren't Rob Lazar is pretty hard to find, where people have, that isn't like some creepy, freaky abduction where they, just get thrown on a table and scary stuff happens. Like I was looking for descriptions of inside the UFO. I wanted to hear like descriptions about like inside the control panels, like all this stuff. And there was one, the channel Beyond Creepy does a really good job of digging up these types of stories that aren't Reddit, because when you go on Reddit, you can't tell if it's somebody's creepypasta story or something like that. He finds stories that are just top of the line, like he does a really good job on these things. So this was 1976, and this was a mechanic named Jan Sedlecki. And this is Beyond Creepy's upload from February 19th of this year, 2022. And it goes like this. I'm going to maybe cut out a little bit, but he says it was August, and what happened is he thought a fire was happening outside when he was sleeping. He said a brilliant white glow suddenly flooded his bedroom, and he looked around. He thought it was a fire outside, so because he had a garage, and he thought it caught fire. So that's the first thing he thought of. So he jumped out of bed and runs to the window. The garage was fine, so the light was coming from somewhere else, he wondered. So he looked up and observed this, wow, that's hard to say, strange saucer-shaped craft hovering about 10 to 15 feet off the ground. It was a glistening deep blue color, and it seemed to be wobbling, and he got the sense that it was in the process of trying to land. Curiosity got the better of him, and he got dressed and stepped outside. He wanted to get a better look at it, so he dashed across the road and hid behind a fence. The machine was unlike anything he'd ever seen before, and he watched as it hovered over a large expanse of grass about 75 yards away. The craft finally descended onto the field silently, and it was supported by several leg-like protrusions. A few seconds later, he observed a tube descend from the center of the object, which was a few feet wide and which reached the ground. Although the entire object was dark, an unusual glow was pouring from its underside. Suddenly, the tube opened like a book. Two humanoid figures, around 4 feet tall, walked out from the tube and stood in front of the object. They seemed to be taking notice of Sedlecki and began beckoning him to come closer for some reason. Sedlecki stepped out from behind the fence and slowly began walking in their direction. He could make out that a conversation was taking place between the two entities. He could not understand the language. The figures were odd-looking, wearing one-piece suits of a yellow-orange color and a kind of helmet with a darkened visor over the face area. They wore mittens on their hands and some kind of boots or shoes, which appeared to be integral to the suit. He also noticed a panel with a series of square-shaped switches and circular buttons on the chest of each humanoid. When the humanoids began adjusting these, Selecki was surprised that he recognized the words they were speaking, like tuning into a frequency that translated speech. He was now able to understand them perfectly, as if they were speaking his language. They told him that they were having trouble with their ship, and they would have to make their repairs before they were able to leave. We apologize for the intrusion. As soon as repaired, we go. The tone of the voices sounded tinny, like a little boy speaking for some reason, despite the strangeness of the situation. This bit of information seemed to put Selecki at ease. Selecki was then invited inside the lift, and he agreed. He watched the door silently close, and the tube moved rapidly upwards as he bent down to walk under the hole, which was about 5 feet off the ground. He noticed 2 rows of what looked like small rotor blades turning very slowly. The doors opened out into a metal cabin standing on a shiny surface. He immediately became aware of the smell of, quote, rotting grass. The 2 figures led him up a sloping ramp that spiraled around what he took to be the ship's inner perimeter. Then into a room. Around the edge of this room lay a 2-foot wide channel of flowing water with some kind of green grass about 2 feet high growing out of it. Selecki then asked about the ship, including the speed and how it was even able to fly. He isn't sure which one of the figures responded, only that it said B-13. Then another door opened, peering into the semi-light compartment. He noticed in the far corner 4 or 5 crouched figures with their heads in between their hands and knees. Unlike the other 2 humanoids, they were dressed in black one-piece suits with no helmets and had brown hair, and the figures were gathered beside a circular pool containing a black bubbling oil-like substance from which flashes of red light darted into the air. The light inside the ship was constant, an unusual yellowish-orange light coming from all the panels. There were no windows or visible openings. Suddenly a football-sized ball of orange light darted around the room, stopping and starting randomly. At this point, Selecki heard the frantic clatter of footsteps from somewhere on the ship, as if people were rushing about in a panic. Selecki was then told by one of the figures that he would need to leave immediately, and that they had a, quote, space bug. Selecki did not understand what this meant. He was quickly ushered down the spiraling staircase by one of the humanoids and was told to step inside the tube. As he did so, the figure looked at Selecki and said, "When you get out, run." Whatever was happening, Selecki understood that it was no joke, and suddenly the door opened and Selecki took off running across the expansive field as fast as he could go. Upon passing the fence line, he looked back and saw that nothing was following him, and then he heard a loud, high-pitched whistling sound. The tripods of the tube lifted inside the object. The whistling intensified, and then the object shot away at an angle of 45 degrees into the sky, and he saw red fire pouring out from its underside. Selecki eventually returned home, and he never saw them again, or he never had another UFO experience. This case was covered in the UK-based magazine, UFO Magazine, Volume 15. So I wonder if the space bug in the first place ended up making the problem with the ship, But it seems so weird to read all these stories of so many different kinds of these creatures. Like, I've heard of, maybe like 100 different kinds of these, like, types of things with, like, UFOs. And, like, some seem bad, some seem secretive, and some don't really care what they share with us, It's just really weird to think about. I'd like to thank everybody for checking out the podcast today. The intro music is Downbeat 88, The Dark, and the outro music is Downbeat 88, Moment of Peace. I'd like to wish my brother a happy birthday, and my Patreon is ParadoxWalk, so patreon.com/ParadoxWalk. Please remember to click the RSS feed so you can be notified of every future upload I have. I'm trying to do weekly or bi-weekly. So far I've done 4 weeks in a row, usually around the weekend. And any crazy stories you got, I'd love to hear at ParadoxWalk Podcast at protonmail.com. Thanks a lot. Have a good day.